Hello everyone! Welcome back to my YouTube channel, and today I am going to show you how to make a nutrition diagnosis, also known as PES statement, and we're going to touch also a little bit on intervention, monitoring, and evaluation. Now, without much further ado, let's get started! Now, before we will proceed, let us have a quick recap of the ADIME, which stands for Assessment, Diagnosis, Intervention, Monitoring, and Evaluation. So, this is our nutrition care process. After doing all the necessary assessments to our patient, we will now proceed to nutrition diagnosis. Now, the first thing I'd like you to remember in making your diagnosis is do not use medical diagnosis, because there is a big difference between a medical diagnosis and a nutrition problem. For example, if your patient has diabetes, you cannot go on writing diabetes for your PES statement. You can perhaps use excessive carbohydrate intake as an example, but this will still vary with the assessment that you have done. Now, if your patient is diagnosed with anorexia nervosa, you cannot also write anorexia nervosa, but you can write inappropriate food choices. But then again, it will still depend on your assessment with your patient. And the last example, if your patient was brought to the hospital because of stroke, you can use excessive intake of saturated fat. Again, this depends on your assessment. The point is, do not use medical diagnosis for your nutrition problem. Now, our nutrition diagnosis consists of three categories. We have the intake, which is related to the inadequate or excessive ingestion of nutrients, energy, fluid, alcohol, dietary supplements, and food ingredients. We also have the clinical diagnosis, which is related to specific medical or physical conditions such as impairments in physiological or mechanical functioning that cause feeding problems, alterations in nutrient metabolism, and body weight problems. We also have the behavioral environmental diagnosis, which is related to the patient's knowledge, attitudes, beliefs, or behaviors, physical abilities, access to food, and also food safety. Now, let us start making our proper PES statement. Now, PES stands for problem, etiology, and signs and symptoms. We will start with the nutrition problem. The nutrition problem that you will be creating is the result of your assessment with the patient. Now, for the nutrition problem, you don't have to invent or make your own, as you can download a guide on the internet. An example of which is the one I am flashing on the screen right now, and I will also put the link in the description box below. Again, for the nutrition problem, we have already discussed that there are three categories of a nutrition problem. But as a dietitian, you may want to consider the intake category as your top priority because this is very specific to the role of a dietitian. Now, an example problem we have here is excessive energy intake. Now, for the next part of our PES statement, we have the etiology. The etiology is the root cause of the problem or the reason why the problem exists. Also remember that the etiology is the focus of our intervention. We are going to talk about this in detail later. The etiology is linked to the problem by the terms related to. Now, going back to our problem earlier, which is excessive energy intake, we will add the etiology, which is related to regular consumption of large portions of high-fat meals. So if I am going to read or analyze this, I can interpret that the patient has excessive energy intake because he regularly consumes large portion of high-fat meals. Now again, our problem is excessive energy intake. So the reason or the root cause why your patient has excessive energy intake is because of his regular consumption of large portion of high-fat meals. Now, I keep repeating that so that you won't be confused, because many times students or even dietitians already really get things mixed up. Now, lastly, let us proceed to the signs and symptoms. Now, the signs and symptoms are evidences to tell that the problem exists. So, you cannot just put any problem in the diagnostic statement without evidences. The signs and symptoms are also the focus of our monitoring and evaluation, which we will again discuss in detail later. The signs and symptoms are linked to the etiology by the terms as evidenced by. Now, let us go back to our example problem, which is excessive energy intake. Now, to really prove that the patient has excessive energy intake, you need to show evidences. Again, for the signs and symptoms, this should be related to your problem. You cannot put evidences like chest x-ray, bilirubin, creatinine clearance, or etc. because this result does not represent excessive intake. Now, going back, while assessing the patient, maybe you found out that the patient gained 12 pounds over the last 18 months. You also check the diet history of the patient or the 24-hour recall, which states that the caloric adequacy of the patient exceeds the daily calorie requirement. Now, put that all into statement and you will come up with your final diagnosis, which is excessive energy intake related to regular consumption of large portions of high-fat meals as evidenced by diet history, 24-hour food recall wherein the caloric adequacy exceeds daily caloric requirements, and 12 pounds weight gain over the last 18 months. Now, for the intervention, monitoring, and evaluation, so this is again our final nutrition diagnosis. Excessive energy intake related to regular consumption of large portions of high-fat meals as evidenced by diet history, 24-hour recall, wherein the caloric adequacy exceeds daily caloric requirement, and a 12-pound weight gain over the last 18 months. So here we have the problem, the excessive energy intake, and we also have here the etiology or the reason for having an excessive energy intake, which is regular consumption of large portions of high-fat meals. So we will make an intervention on this one. Just a few reminders in making your interventions. Always focus on what the dietitian can do to help the patient. For example, if the patient is currently having financial struggles, you cannot really intervene on that one because that is not your priority. But you can help by suggesting food choices that will fit their budget. Now, so for this patient, since he regularly consumes large portions of high-fat meals, perhaps we can intervene by giving nutrition counseling, educating the patients on the effects of high-fat meals and how he can reduce fat in his diet. And we can also suggest low-fat recipes and many more. Then for the signs and symptoms, we have diet history, 12-pound weight gain over the last 18 months. Also, the 24-hour recall, I forgot to place it here. 24-hour recall, which exceeds the caloric requirement. Also to add, the signs and symptoms again are the parameters that we are going to check if the patient is improving. Now for this patient, you can conduct again another 24-hour recall to see if the caloric adequacy does not exceed the caloric requirement. You can also check the patient's weight at the next visit, so you will be hoping that there will be no more weight gain or perhaps the patient has lost a little weight, and that would be great. But in the event that there are no changes on the signs and symptoms, it's time to reevaluate the intervention. You ask yourself why the intervention isn't working or what is wrong. Okay? In addition to the intervention, there may be times when the dietitian cannot make an intervention on the etiology or the root cause of the problem, but can also make an intervention on the signs and symptoms. Let us take this PES statement as an example. So for this patient, he is having a problem with his intake, and the problem is inadequate calorie intake, and the reason for that one is he has difficulty swallowing. Alright? Now, in this case, the dietitian cannot really do anything with the swallowing difficulty because that is beyond the dietitian's capacity. But the dietitian can intervene with the food intake perhaps by modifying the diet, recommending a soft diet or dysphagia diet to help the patient. Then same with the previous discussion for the monitoring and evaluation, the dietitian can monitor the weight of the patient if he is gaining weight, if the 24-hour food recall states adequacy, and if the patient can verbalize that he can swallow the food well. These are other examples of PES statements. I hope I was able to impart something with you today. Thank you so much, and till my next video. Please don't forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell, like, share, and also hit the super thanks button below the video. Thank you everyone. Bye!